Oh, we're ready for the Ninth Commandment of the Big Ten. So just 2 lessons left as we have been looking at the 10 Commandments. And the Ninth Commandment, of course, is to not bear false witness against your neighbor. George O'Leary was a football coach for many, many years. He was quite successful. He'd been coaching at Georgia Tech University and had a record of 52-33 and had gone to 5 straight bowl games. And his main goal all of his life had been to put himself in position for his dream job. He was a devout Catholic, and on December of 2002, O'Leary was announced as the new head coach of probably the most famous football program in the country, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. It was his dream. And O'Leary himself, not only a Catholic, but of Irish descent, seemed the perfect fit. And he was for 4 days. 5 days after he was hired, O'Leary resigned in disgrace. It all came crashing down on George O'Leary after the first day of the job. Notre Dame University received a phone call from a reporter who had tried to interview a few of O'Leary's old teammates, and though his resume claimed that he had lettered 3 years in football as an offensive lineman and a fullback at the University of New Hampshire, none of his teammates remembered him. None of them remembered anything about his career. The reporter did a little more digging and uncovered documentation that showed O'Leary himself had really fudged heavily on the facts. Years before, he had applied for a coaching job at the University of Syracuse. He was handed a form that had asked his athletic achievements, and his high school record wasn't impressive. So he decided to embellish it a bit. In other words, he lied. He was on the team for a brief while at New Hampshire, but due to sickness and injury and inability, he never got into a single game. That alone might not have taken him down, but the reporter continued to dig. And as it turned out, O'Leary's resume also claimed that he had earned a master's degree in education from New York University. And again, though he had been a student there for a short time, less than a year, the school confirmed he had never earned a degree. And for 21 years, those lies followed George O'Leary to Syracuse and to Georgia Tech, and then finally to his dream job, Notre Dame. And I'm sure that he knew they were there. And I'm sure there were times he thought about correcting the falsehoods. But once you tell a lie, it is just easier to live with it than to clear it up. But usually what you don't clear up blows up. And that's what happened on that day. What seemed like such an innocent and harmless action at the time, after all it had been committed 21 years ago, suddenly turned George O'Leary's dream job into his worst nightmare. To his credit, in the aftermath of the incident, he called what he had done a stupid, selfish, and thoughtless act and tried to explain away his circumstances by saying, I was a young married father trying to take care of my family, seeking employment. But in the end, the shortcuts, the compromises, and justifications destroyed both a successful career and a good reputation and cost him the one job he wanted more than any other job in the world. I feel a little sorry for George O'Leary. You would think after the O'Leary incident, everybody in America, because it was top news story for a week or so, would scan their own resume for inaccuracies, but apparently that is not the attitude held by most people. Philip Ryken, who refers to the George O'Leary saga in his book on the Ten Commandments, tells of a survey done on nearly 3 million job applicants. Nearly 3 million. 71% recorded a false number of years on the job. 64% exaggerated their accomplishments. 60% exaggerated the size of the corporation one managed. 52% turned partial college work into a full degree, and 48% reported larger past compensation than had been actually earned. Which says to me, if you're a human resource officer who gets paid to review resumes, you no longer need to interview the prospective employee. You need to hire an investigator is what you need to do. Evidently, the average resume is no longer a believable document. Resumes have gone everywhere from fact to fiction to maybe even fantasy. And it doesn't surprise us, because everywhere we look in today's world, we find people we respected, people in high positions, sometimes even heroes, end up discredited by their lies, by their dishonesty. And lies and deception don't just grasp people like George O'Leary. They invade many other famous arenas as well. Pulitzer Prize winner Joseph Ellis won the Pulitzer for this book telling stories of his combat days in Vietnam, when the truth was he spent the entire war teaching at West Point. He was not in Vietnam. Evidently, he was so in love with history that he began just making history up. Lance Armstrong was one of the most respected people in the whole world. Record-breaking cyclist. Had broken nearly every record in cycling that you can have. And yet, he was caught up in a PED scandal, lied specifically about it, and you hadn't heard from him now in over a decade. And who can forget the singing sensation Milli Vanilli? The dance band duet sold millions of records and won the Grammy for Best Vocal Group of the Year. But they were also the first group that had to give a Grammy back when it came out that the voices on their albums were not even their own. They were other people's voices. They lip-synced their songs. Or why don't we just go to the top level of jobs in the United States? These two men both lied to the public repeatedly. One said that he had absolutely nothing to do with Watergate. There was nothing there. I am not a crook. The other said, I did not have sex with that woman. At the highest job level in not only the United States, but maybe the world, our leaders lied to us and broke the Ninth Commandment. So I think I've demonstrated pretty adequately just how widespread this breaking of the Ninth Commandment really is. In their book, The Day America Told the Truth, authors Patterson and Kim estimate that 91% of Americans regularly embellish the truth. 91%. And they said, and I quote, "We lie and we don't even think about it." It's just as if society has lost its love and respect for the truth altogether. But here's something I didn't know. I read recently about a company called the Alibi Agency. that specializes in helping you fabricate a lie. They will provide the needed paper trail to cover up all your actual activities, dummy invitations to business and social events, ticket stubs to the sporting event you said that you attended. They even have a phony switchboard that provides verbal evidence that you're where you said you'd be in case your wife or family member or boss or whoever it is calls it. An advertisement to the alibi agency claims, "We can tailor-make an alibi to your specifications." Well, isn't that just dandy? We live in a day filled with situational ethics, where we think, from George O'Leary to the alibi agency and everything in between, we think the end justifies the means. So people say, if a lie helps more than it harms, go ahead and lie. We don't like to think about the fact that there might be a price to be paid later. We certainly don't want to think about consequences, and yet Proverbs 19:9 backs up the truth of the Ninth Commandment and says, a false witness will not go unpunished, and a liar will be destroyed. Hey, today, university professors and even high school teachers tell our young people that absolute truth does not exist, that there's really no such thing as absolute truth. So then, why do we act surprised when those same students, as high school students or college students, go out into the world and don't tell the truth to their parents or their employer or their friends or the police, and later in life then don't tell the truth to their spouse? Why would that surprise us? There is no such thing as absolute truth, and there's no such thing as lying. And that is where our culture has taken itself to. The Ninth Commandment specifically says, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And it is strategic to the formation and continuation of a peaceful society. I've told you since the beginning of this series that the reason these 10 Commandments were so important is these were a group of people, maybe as many as 3 million out in the desert, who had never governed themselves. They had always been slaves to the Egyptians all their lives. They'd never known self-government. They'd never known taking care of themselves. They'd never had a legal system. And so now, after they cross the Red Sea and they camp at the foot of Mount Sinai, very shortly after the Exodus, God takes Moses up on the mountain and God thunders down these 10 Commandments verbally first, and then writes them on hand to give to Moses. Moses brings them down. Moses gets mad at the people because they have turned to idol worship. He destroys the tablets by throwing them down. God brings him back up for a second time with the hand of God. He writes the 10 Commandments in stone. And it was the first time they had ever had to deal with telling the truth, governing those who didn't tell the truth. Every society and nation is held together by this, by honest communication. If I can't trust what you say, then it's totally impossible for us to have a meaningful relationship. Business breaks down if you can't trust what's being said. Marriage becomes mute if you can't trust what the partner is saying. The courts become totally dysfunctional if you can't trust the judge, the district attorney, prosecutors, and the testimony of the victim, and the testimony of the defendant. Courts become dysfunctional. When a person's word is no longer his bond, when contracts aren't worth the paper they're printed on, when the judicial system is allowed to be circumvented by skilled lawyers who are very sharp and know how to twist the truth or run through the loopholes to win the case, or when crooked politicians say anything to get elected, you have a society that is on the verge of breakdown. You just do. An honest society is built on honest people. And that's what God is saying to us in the Big Ten. Now, the immediate context of the Ninth Commandment has to do with truth-telling in a court of law. This commandment, for instance, forbids perjury, lying under oath. And it implies to every member of the legal system that a judge should be fair and impartial, that a prosecutor should have no other ulterior motive than a desire for justice, that the defense should seek a lawful treatment and fair treatment, and the witness should tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God, which is what you pledge to do. In other words, everybody involved in the legal process is to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. God is the witness to that truth. So not bearing false witness was particularly vital in ancient times. Before days like today, before the development of rules for evidence in the days of forensic science and DNA, a person's testimony was all-powerful, all-important. Often a trial swung on the word just of a witness. I'm not talking about now back at the foot of Mount Sinai. I'm talking about 50 years ago even. 75, 100 years ago. That's why this commandment has been so relevant, because a whole trial swung on the truthful testimony. And since many of the crimes carried a death sentence, a false witness could be absolutely lethal. And that is why God told his people in Deuteronomy 19:15, you must not convict anyone of a crime on the testimony of only one witness. The facts of the case must be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. All right, so Moses gives them the Ninth Commandment at the foot of Mount Sinai, but as the law is being revealed to them in the book of Deuteronomy, this addition is added to it. Now, takes more than one witness. It's got to have 2 or 3 truthful witnesses to convict you. In other words, it required some corroborative testimony. And if a man was found to be a false witness, then you should impose on the accuser the sentence he intended for the other person. Wow. And you can just picture that, can't you? Somebody has given false witness, and then 2 or 3 people stand up and say, no, that's not true. The first guy's innocent. This guy's the one that has done it. Bang. You're dead. The perjurer serves the same sentence he tried to pin on his enemy, which is part of where our laws for perjury come from in our country. What goes around comes around. It was a serious crime to bear false witness. But the Ninth Commandment applies to far more than just a court of law. It sticks its nose into every corner, literally, of our business. Because we're told repeatedly in the Old and New Testament that we should always tell the truth. Always. In marriage, in the workplace, in the marketplace, in the home, in the church. In our dealings with friends, we should always be an advocate for the truth. And bearing false witness involves anything we might do that fabricates a falsehood. You can lie and tell an untruth about someone else, or you can tell a half-truth. You know what a half-truth is? A half-truth is truth sprinkled with a lie. Or you can water down the truth. You know what water down the truth means? Or you can exaggerate the truth. That is what husbands and wives do on a regular basis when they use the phrase, "He never does this," or "She always does this." Look, none of us are so consistent as to never do this or always do that. I wish I was that consistent at some things, that I could always be counted on to never do this or to always do this. We're not. Those are usually lies. Nobody's that consistent to be never or always. And we can also bear false witness by making a completely truthful statement, but with an incriminating tone of voice. You know what I mean? Or, and this is the way it can really sometimes happen with people and damage and hurt people, to repeat it out of context. It reminds me of the man who encountered a traffic accident one night. He bravely and heroically pried an injured woman from her mangled car, picked her up in his arms, carried her to the hospital. And later, a woman who saw the incident said to the man's wife, "Last night I saw your husband walking down the street with another woman in his arms." Now, technically, that comment was true, but it wasn't truthful. There are all kinds of ways to lie. There are occasions when just sitting in silence is one of the worst ways to lie. When another person is being torn apart, when another person is being maligned, and you know the statements aren't true, and you just sit silently and don't speak up, setting the record straight, that is bearing false witness and breaking the Ninth Commandment. And we need to understand that God hates lying so much that of the 6 things, 7, that the book of Proverbs says he detests, 3 of them, nearly half of them, have to do directly with lying. There are 6 things the Lord hates, no 7 things he detests: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that kill the innocent, a heart that plots evil, feet that race to do wrong, a false witness who pours out lies, a person who sows discord in a family. It's incredible. At least 3 of these 7, and maybe you could argue 4, have to do with bearing false witness. And those are the 7 things God hates the most. If you ever doubted God's hatred for lying, all you have to do is go back in the Bible to Acts chapter 5, to the story of Ananias and Sapphira. It is a killer of a Bible study. It's a drop-dead passage. It's a knock-em-over chapter, it really is. Ananias and Sapphira were just dying to get into the Bible. Okay, just trying to make sure you're awake. Here was the all-American couple. Ananias was a former quarterback, Sapphira the cheerleader. They were leaders in the community, models of success, business leaders. They clearly had a lot of money. We can tell that from the passage. And they embraced Jesus and joined the church, the way. And understand here, people in Acts chapter 4 ends with believers bringing all their possessions and giving to the poor and giving to the needs of the church. I mean, it was in the that end of Acts chapter 4 is where Barnabas was talked about in his generosity and how the whole church is doing this. And so Ananias and Sapphira see this. Now, God never commanded anybody to sell their land and pool their resources. It was just a practice the church members had adopted, but Ananias and Sapphira didn't want to be left out, and they didn't want to look bad. So to them, image was everything, and this story speaks of image if nothing else does. So they wanted to appear as spiritual and sacrificial and generous as everybody else was, and they sold a parcel of property. They said they were giving all the proceeds to the church as other of the members had done, but they lied. They kept back part of it for themselves. And when Peter called them out, he said, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and keep back part of the price of the land for yourselves? And Peter calls this couple on the carpet, and they never get up. I had to throw one more back in. And Ananias is first, and then Sapphira. And both drop dead. I'm not being funny with that one. That's true. For their deception and their hypocrisy and their lying. God wants to show us what he thinks of bearing false witness. So he tells us not only what he thinks, but he tells us who is behind it. For you are the children of your father the devil, and you love to do the evil things he does. He was a murderer from the beginning. He has always hated the truth because there is no truth in him. When he lies, it is consistent with his character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. Now, Jesus is speaking to a group of legalistic Jews when he says this, and he calls Satan a murderer and the father, the originator of lies. As you know, back in the Garden of Eden, he was exactly that. And I want you to see the close connection between the two sins. The Ninth Commandment is closely related to the Sixth Commandment. You shall not murder or bear false witness. Bearing false witness is murder without bloodshed and physical violence. Bearing false witness is assassination of character, the murder of someone's reputation. It's the shot from a gun still, but just a gun that has a silencer on the end. They're really two peas in the same pod. Commandment number 6 and number 9. Now I want you to notice the progression of the last 3 or 4 commandments that we have studied in the Big Ten. Murder robs us of life itself. Adultery robs and destroys marriage, the institution that propagates life. Stealing takes away resources that are needed to sustain life. And slander robs us of the rewards of a truly successful life. It destroys character and reputation. And that's why Satan just loves it. He eats this stuff up. He loves lying. He's the father of lies. It's because he hates people and he hates the truth. If he cannot annihilate your life himself, he'll do his best to get other people to annihilate your life in these ways. That's why he's always stirring up lies and gossip and slander. As Jesus said, he is the father of lies. He's the originator of all lies. Hey, when you find yourself sharing a bit of gossip with a friend, listen carefully, and you may be able to hear Satan say in your ear, "Who's your daddy?" Satan loves for you to tell a lie. Because he knows that when you tell the first lie, the probability of telling another lie increases exponentially. Tell the second lie and the third lie is virtually inevitable. And when you tell the third lie, a fourth lie is a foregone conclusion. And once you start lying, you fall into a vicious cycle of cover-up and deception. And lying or bearing false witness is extremely stressful. You never can relax. You're always dodging questions and covering your tracks and trying not to forget what lies you've told before that might catch up on you. And this is why most lies, like George O'Leary's that we began with, get uncovered. A liar tells so many lies trying to hide his previous lie that he sometimes forgets what's true and what's not true, and sometimes he begins to actually believe his own lies. It becomes like reality to him, and he gets caught up in his own deceitfulness. That's why the old saying is true. Honesty is not the best policy. It is the only policy. That's why it's true what we've often said, and that is, if you're always honest, you don't have to worry about what you've said. You don't. You don't have to remember what you've said. Now, given all this evidence, I decided to spend the last few minutes this morning talking about, well, why do we do it? Why do we lie? And this is where it might get just a tad bit uncomfortable. There are a myriad of reasons, I think, why we lie. Satan's certainly one of them. He's the father of lies. But our own weakness and selfishness can cause us to resort to deception as well. But why do we lie? I think maybe the most common reason, starting when you're about 2 years old, certainly by the time you are 3 years old, is a fear of consequences. A fear of punishment will cause us to lie. We'll tell mommy or daddy when we're 2 or 3 years old, no, I didn't break that. When they know full well you did, and they know you did too. But there's a fear of punishment there in the 2 or 3 year old. We tell a bill collector the check is in the mail because we don't want a penalty. We tell the police the speedometer was broken. That doesn't work, by the way. We tell the teacher our dog ate our homework. Has that ever worked? But we do any of those things, and all of those things because we fear a penalty. We fear a consequence. We lie to our spouse or our parents because we don't want them to be disappointed with us. But when that gets uncovered, a trust is broken and a relationship gets injured, and in the end, the lie causes a far greater disappointment than whatever was being lied about. That's just a reality. That's true. I think we also lie to get back at people. For some people, talking trash is just an art. So people resort to lies as a means of revenge and retribution to get back to people. You can't win the argument with them head on, or they have the moral superiority over you over the moment, so you lie and try to hurt them with lies. I also am very certain that many people lie because of feelings of insecurity. They can't stand to look foolish or come across inadequate in the eyes of their peers or friends, so they just sort of doctor up the truth. They drop names or embellish their stories or lie on their resume or brag about their past achievements. Lots of people will try to spruce up the truth to enhance their image and make themselves look better than they really are. That's what George O'Leary did. It basically was insecurity for him, and he admitted it when he said, I had a young family, I needed a job. He was insecure. Another major reason that we lie, I think, is laziness and irresponsibility. It's why we sign our name to a test, knowing the answers that we've put down on the test do not belong to us. We've cheated. We were too lazy or too negligent to study. It was much easier to just look at somebody else's answers or get a copy of the test answers. And perhaps the most common reason people lie is to accommodate their own selfishness. They lie to get what they want. They lie to manipulate a situation a certain way. If a lie will win the contract or close the deal or put more money in their pocket, they'll sell out integrity in a heartbeat. And you see this happen in business multiple times every day. But let me suggest that I think ultimately the reason we lie is a lack of faith. If we believe in God's mercies, we won't fear what man can do to us. But if we believe vengeance belongs to the Lord, that in the end God will settle every score and humble every foe, there's no need for us to seek revenge. And if we believe that God loves us, and as Philippians chapter 2 says, will exalt us up next to the Savior in the highest place, if we believe we are truly God's kids, God's heirs, there is absolutely no reason to be in bondage to other people's opinions and care about that enough to lie and bear false witness. Ultimately, I think we lie for all of these reasons, but I think all of these reasons can also be placed in one bag that says lack of faith. Now, the Ninth Commandment is not just a prohibition against lying and bearing false witness. Moses said, "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor." God is concerned about us doing harm to each other with our words. As truth tellers, we need to be totally accurate when we make comments about another person, which means if we don't have all the information, there should be no communication. I say this all the time when people try to tell me a story and try to get me to take a side on something. I'll say, I don't know. I'm neutral right here because I don't have enough information. I just don't have enough information. It's sad to count up how many people have had a good reputation destroyed because another person made an idle comment. An idle comment. Remember, gossip is nothing less than character assassination. And it's very difficult to get it back once it has gotten out. It's been defined as hearing something you like about someone you don't. And how tempting is it when you hear something you like about someone maybe you don't like so much to share that information? It's been said a tongue 3 inches long can kill a man 6 feet tall. And that's true. The trouble caused by the human tongue. The Bible says in the book of James, it's the only body part that has its own cage. You can keep it in your mouth and shut the door. So you can't understand me, can you? James 3:6 tells us that. Well, it's supposed to. The tongue is a fire, a world of fire, set on the fires of hell. You know, as kids we had the expression, liar, liar. You do know it. That's what James is saying about the tongue. It's on fire. In one of my books, I used a little acrostic that might help you the next time you're tempted to think and speak about a person or their motives without really knowing all the facts. It's just such a nice little acrostic that I once had Joe Tansey here make me, when he was in the printing business, he made me a little plaque of it, and I kept it on my desk because it's certainly something that people in my form of work need to make sure they try to practice. It's the word think. The T, is it true? The H, is it helpful? It may be true, but it's not helpful. It doesn't resolve the situation at all. And then think I, is it inspiring? Does it offer encouragement, or is it somehow going to be discouraging to somebody else? And then think N, is it necessary? Is there a legitimate reason it should be said? We all know some things that are not good about people, but is it necessary to say them? Is there any good going to come from it? And finally, K, is it kind? Is this a loving, caring comment to make about another person? Think before you speak, and you might just save another person's life. Literally. I love the story about 3 preachers who were in a boat, and they were fishing. One of the men commented, I got something that's really been bothering me. It's been eating me up, and I need to confess. I keep a little wine in my office, and every now and then I take a nip, and actually I take several nips, and I get drunk. And I need to stop. And I need y'all to pray for me. Nobody said anything for a while, and the second preacher spoke up and said, I got a problem too. Every now and then I walk by a magazine rack, I pick up a dirty magazine. It's terrible. I know I shouldn't do it. And I need y'all to pray for me. The third preacher just sat there in complete silence. Finally, his buddies turned to him and said sarcastically, well, I suppose you're perfect. I suppose you just don't have any problems, do you? He said, no, that's not true at all. As a matter of fact, I'm a terrible gossip, and I can't wait to get back to town. If we want to be the church God has called us to be, we need to be truth tellers. We need to know that we can depend on what we are saying to one another is the truth. We need to love the truth. We need to uphold the truth. We need to always speak the truth. We need to always be men and women of integrity. And if you've told a specific lie, ask God to forgive you. If you've told something that injures another person, or an exaggeration, or a half-truth, or any of the things we talked about are clearly bearing false witness today, ask them to forgive you. I have found that almost every time they will, and a relationship will be restored. Or as Ephesians 4:25 says, so stop telling lies. Let us tell our neighbors the truth, for we are all parts of the same body. So we're going to do one thing or the other. We're either going to break the Ninth Commandment and we're going to bear false witness against our neighbors, or we're going to tell our neighbors the truth because we're all part of the same body.